Today on Deep Thoughts, we're going to talk about waking up. We wrote an article back on onepagenews.com called Waking Up is Hard to Do. And it's based on a lot of different avenues of evidence, but the largest piece of evidence are the quoted, arrogant, hubris memoirs of the most powerful people in the world and basic psychology. So waking up is a very relative term. So you may want to know, which part of waking up am I talking about? When we are born, we are absolutely this innocent life force in the universe. We don't know what racism is. We really don't even know what greed is. We're just omnipresent, omnipotent to the universe, and it is this mortal coil called humanoid, Homo sapien, and the societal indoctrinations that we have put together in our psychoses that we then enforce on top of our children to give them preferences in life that largely destroy their ability to become anything different than anyone else who's already failed. I know that sounds a little esoteric, but when we talk about waking up, it very scientifically is, it's almost as if every idea that someone has given you as a child or a teenager or pre-adolescent, adult, whatever, is another wrapping paper job on your present. And you're the present on the inside. You have amazing things to offer the world, surprises that the world's never conceived of. But by being wrapped up in indoctrination, every single time you accept some other person's philosophy without vetting it first to make sure it's part of your philosophy of life, something you're interested in, because you're going to be sanctioned away from it once you get wrapped up in this counter theory. Waking up is taking those layers off, penetrating the layers to escape, like the Logan's Run guy trying to get to the surface so he could see the sun for the very first time, never knowing that the sun existed, therefore never missing the sun. And we're sort of that Logan's Run guy in subterranean city, deep down inside the indoctrination that has been sold to us. And just to clarify, it's not that our parents are bad, or uncles or aunts are bad, or teachers are bad, or anyone's bad in the world for passing this down to you. It's just they've been asleep as well, because this epidemic's been going on for thousands of years. But there are families on this planet that, even though they have their own indoctrination, they are largely awake, and they certainly don't have the wrapping paper on them that you have, in most cases. If they do, it's only one layer out of 1,000. They're more awake than you. They're more in control of their life than you, and they control you. And we don't want that. We want pure sovereignty, no matter how it ends up being. We're going to need new rules after we break free of all this stuff. But at least we'll understand them as a society. We wrote an article, like I said, called Waking Up is Hard to Do. The article is based on the fact that the human psyche has a limit. No matter how badass you are in life, no matter how experienced you are in life, everyone has a limit to how much negativity and horror, per their definition, they can ingest before the mind shuts down and says, no more. No more. Go find another reason why this happened. Go find another reason we don't have to think about this. But go find it, because I can't deal with it. One elite person after another, one ruling class individual banker after another has lamented in memoirs, in meetings, in conferences with the press, that as long as what they do is so horrific that the public can't allow themselves to believe what we did, we get to do whatever we want forever. Because the people will sanction themselves from contemplating what we did. And they will take whatever excuse we give them that hurts less. David Icke coined the phrase problem, reaction, solution. That is the foundation. It's also, he based his out of order out of chaos, but it's easier to understand his version. Problem, reaction, solution. They create the problem. They program us with the reaction because they own all the press, the Reuters AP arteries, and then they give us the solution, which is what they wanted in the first place. Now, before I get into some examples like the article does, let's just rewind for a second to go after, do you need to wake up? Now, most of our listeners are totally awake. If you're bumping into this video for the first time, then welcome. You might be bumping into this video having explored things 10 times more than any one of us as MK Ultra presenters or listeners, but you may be coming to us as an absolute virgin to the universe, and you're kind of wondering whether or not you should continue listening. So let me throw this at you. Conspiracies are things that I think in any realm of measurement combat society, combat progress, in the name of someone else hanging on to yesterday. We don't, like the ruling class will say, we don't want to change. We want things to stay the same. Or they're like, this group isn't like us, so we want them to change like us. Or we manipulated this country to behave in a way that gave us all the control, and there's another country over here that isn't quite in the following our rules game, and so we want to take them over as well. Now, those are big issues, but let's look at a few that, if you're a layman, and I don't mean any offense by that, I used to get offended by that word. Layman just means you're new. Let's look at a few things that you know happen all the time. Gas prices. Gas prices go up and down all year round, at least in America. They tend to bring them down in the wintertime when people aren't traveling, and they tend to drive them up in the summertime. At all times during the process, the amount of oil that's available and the amount of oil that's being pumped out of the ground is almost identical throughout the year. They simply raise it because they know there's nothing we can do about it. We are utter slaves to oil. We are slaves to gasoline. Now, some of you drive electric vehicles. You may be less of a slave. But you know that's a conspiracy of greed against you. Now, you might have someone say, well, they're just being nice. You know, they could just raise the price a little bit and keep it up all year round, but they give you a reprieve in the wintertime, and then they just take their losses and they push them into the summertime and they get their profits back. No. They're making amazing, ridiculous profits all year round, and the tax cuts that they get, which are your taxes. Remember, anytime there's a tax cut for any corporation, all that means is you pay their taxes. So if Walmart gets a $10 billion tax break, that just means $10 billion worth of taxes went back on your taxes. So anytime you hear of a corporate tax break, it's not free anywhere. It just got pushed to the people in most cases. Okay. All right, products. How many times have you seen the toothpaste that you brush your teeth with get improved on a commercial? More fluoride, perhaps, right? Which you need to stop brushing with, but more this, more that. And you just do the math over 50 years that Lysol's existed, that Colgate's existed, and there's no way they could continue improving it every single year. There's just no way. You can't put more chemicals inside there, otherwise it become deadly or toxic to your body. But every single year they claim something has improved with the product. How many times you go to the 99-cent store and you see a bunch of products advertised as the best of the best? And you know to yourself, well, if I buy this sponge, it's going to be dead in 1 week, as opposed to the other sponge that I buy at the grocery store that's 3 times as much, but it'll last for me a month to 2 months. Marketing departments are the greatest conspiracy centers of the world, convincing you quite blatantly in your face that you need something that you don't need. Nobody needs most of the stuff that we have. We just are bored. And like George Carlin said, we live in malls to satiate our boring lives. So we shop until we drop. We shop until our credit cards are full. And then we get depressed because we can't pay them off. Right? How many times has the news reached into the bowels of society and pulled out a 1% contingency of behavior and pushed it at you as if that's the only method by which anyone behaves? The Ferguson, Missouri riots. It's not like it's probably about a 1%, It's a very minimal thing that happens. where, in that particular case, you had a kid who nobody knew in the world. He went into a liquor store and stole some cigars, just ripped them out of this guy's hand. You can watch the video. But nobody knew who he was, and then the cop pulled him over, and he immediately punched the cop in the face, and the cop unloaded on him and killed him. Later we find out the kid's a complete thug. He's a massive human being to begin with, so he's got this huge I don't know how tall the guy was, but I put him between 6'3" and 6'5", and he was proportionate and massive. I watched a video of him beating an elderly black man until he was completely knocked out. Cold-cocked him in the face as a total coward. And this is the guy that Ferguson, Missouri lost its shit over. A complete thug, a complete asshole. I don't care what color that guy was, he needed to go down. Maybe not death. But then again, once you punch a police officer in the face, what do you expect? What do you expect? I guarantee if it was a white homeless man punching that cop in the face, there wouldn't be cuffs for the white guy and bullets for the black guy. Both guys go down. Both guys go down for sure. But the press reaches in and they start exacerbating society to make us all believe we hate each other. To bring up that maybe that one racist situation in your life, or maybe you had a bias and you saw something and you just had a reaction, a tribal reaction, and it was a racist one. Not one you're proud of, but you had it anyway, and that's just humanity. Richard Pryor was one of the greatest comedians in the world, and not just because he's one of the funniest men to ever live, but because he understood sociology on a level that I think few human beings that have ever walked Earth understood it. And he provided all cultures jokes to laugh among us in a way that really reached into the bowels of our id, our ego, and helped us relieve the tensions of genetic tribalism. If you go back and watch all his stuff, his jokes are not just black jokes, white jokes, Chinese jokes, all this other stuff. He had an endearing aura about him where you knew he wasn't trying to offend you. It was hard to push on Richard that, he was walking around trying to create a race war. He wasn't. He just had magic. He was a magical human being. Taken from us much too soon. Waking up. It's something we all need to do, and we have to do it anywhere that we can. So you can wake up to media, you can wake up to politics, you can wake up to grand conspiracies, you can wake up to product announcements that are BS, right? Apple Computers released 3 updates to their operating system, Maverick, Yosemite, and El Capitan. Being an engineer myself, being an interface designer myself, and using this product constantly, I couldn't tell you what really improved between those 3 operating systems, yet they're billed as big, giant improvements. The only thing that's happened is more surveillance has been installed in my operating system, more annoying notifications, more of my information being sent to the cloud, more of the cloud coming down to me, but no value to my day-to-day operations. And that's important because they're promoting themselves as a brand new product, but all they're doing is really trying to prove to the NSA that they have the best game in town. If you want to raid our computers, we got it all ready for you. It's all harvested. Eyes and nose and face scanning in both your photographs and your movies with iMovie. Final Cut if you're dumb enough to turn the feature on. Spotlight has the drive completely indexed for the content of the files, ready to rock and roll. Every computer has a camera on it nowadays, so if you want to just pop that on and take a look at what's going on in the bedroom, well, there you go. There are conspiracies absolutely everywhere, and they're not for your benefit. And usually where you hear a company protest too much, a company that says we're not evil, or don't be evil, or whatever, that's what Google's thing is. They're the ones that protest too much, and they are projecting what they really are as an anti-message. Tim Cook that goes around saying how secure all Apple products are when every hacker institution on Earth can hack anything in their units in seconds. Your fingerprint scan, which was never supposed to be readable, was hacked within 2 weeks by a German outfit. No change to the phone, no response to that. Just they said, we don't send your fingerprint information anywhere. Well, they harvest it and get it ready in a microchip just in case someone wants to backdoor the phone and get it. Putting the biometric data of every person who owns an iPhone into a national database to be later used, I guess. So, let's go deeper now. I debate how deep to go, but I just give you a bunch of tiny ones. right? I want to pick out 9/11 and use that as an example because that's what I used in the article. And the article actually has some useful images if you want to take a look. And if you just go to onepagenews.com, click on recommended path at the top, I believe it is one of the very first articles besides immediate health risks. We put health first on that website so that you could get out of all the toxins immediately, because regardless if you're awake, we want you healthy. So we put all the stuff up there and explained it to you. So maybe like the second article down. 9/11 is a weird one. 9/11 is what we call a false flag. And I've debated doing a episode completely on false flags, but then again I thought, well, after a while, most of the people who watch this particular program will have already researched all these false flags. So to have another person regurgitate a bunch of false flags, then you're just essentially comparing notes and trying to tit for tat anything I've got wrong. So I didn't want to bring up any false flags outside of a contextual learning experience. And so I think waking up is the perfect way to do that. Now, the weird irony about false flags is that people who believe they know the truth by following the official story, and you can't blame these individuals, right? They just haven't awakened yet. That's all. It is frustrating when you meet them and it's, 15 years past certain events, and you're like, you still believe that? Really? If you meet anyone who believes that Lee Harvey Oswald shot Kennedy, you're looking at a relic. You're looking at a mud tablet from Sumeria. Someone who actually holds on to that story. But 9/11 is very complex, but the way that we try to look at these false flags, and for those of you who do not know what I'm talking about, a false flag is when your government creates an event that is really designed to move forward a government agenda by which they could not have moved forward if they hadn't created this false flag event. It's a problem, reaction, solution archetype. So they create a problem. They want the solution over here. In the particular case of 9/11, the agenda was to go after Eurasia for two reasons. One, to secure a bunch of oil, since now OPEC had been allowed to sell oil in euros, which was going to kill the United States dollar. So that was a problem. The problem was that the Taliban, who didn't believe in drugs, but does believe in killing women, supposedly, they cut down all the poppy seeds that the CIA harvests and sells all over the world to create heroin. So they had cut it all down, and they needed to get that replanted, which is why in November of 2001, right after 9/11, here we are trying to find the bad guys that did this, right, who are all supposedly Saudis, but we're in Afghanistan, creating our staging area, blaming a bunch of people in Afghanistan. Our soldiers were replanting the poppy seeds. So that's one. The other one is that they wanted to take over all these Middle Eastern countries that continually cause the ruling class of the world, who don't do any favors for us, let me tell you, but they want to take over those countries and reconstitute them into a money system that is fiat, which means fake. Doesn't really mean fake, but it's a Latin word for so shall it be or something, but so that they could control them completely, control their politicians, control everything, and essentially say that your land's our land through some bad IMF deals. So we had oil, opium, which turns into heroin, and control, financial control over their countries. That was the major objective, as outlined in Zygmunt Brzezinski's book, The Grand Chessboard, with a false motive in his book. But it totally outlines where to go, mostly focused on oil. Well, the governments of the world and the ruling class of the world understood that they just came to the American people and said, look, we want to go over and steal, take, theft, steal all the oil from these countries that own the oil. And they knew that no one would support them. If they went over and said, well, the CIA doesn't really have a budget on the books like we need to. We create $4 trillion a year selling opium around the world, and we use that opium as heroin. We also grow, the CIA smuggles cocaine from South America. They've been caught red-handed with C-130s that are Forest Commission C-130s filled to the brim with both heroin and cocaine in Turkey for heroin catch, and one in, I believe, Mexico was full of cocaine, refined, ready to go. Hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars worth of that substance in each one of the C-130s. Totally refined, ready to rock and roll. This is public knowledge, okay? The Forest Commission even wrote a letter to the CIA that was released that said, if you're going to use our jets, which we don't get a chance to use but comes off of our budget, our 34 C-130 jets, which are supposed to be used to fight forest fires, if you're going to take them and usurp them and use them for your drug trafficking, at least do us the favor and not get caught. There was a letter that they sent over. So there's that, and then there's control, taking over these countries. 3 objectives. If they said, we want to do all these things, well, the American people go, well, one, we had no idea you're creating all this liquid cash selling drugs. Well, some people do. And we can't steal oil from other people, and other countries get to live the way they want to live. So no one would support that. So they have to utterly shock and awe our minds to the point that we have no faculties to think by. Oh, and by the way, they want to destroy all the rights in America, which is what's occurred via 9/11. You know, it would be like someone sneaking into your house and raping one of your children, right? Horrific concept. But your solution is to not let your children ever go outside again. You don't even go outside again. You can't watch television. You can't read. You can't do anything in the house anymore. It's totally locked down because someone else invaded your privacy and hurt one of your people. That's what we've done to America after 9/11. All 10 Bill of Rights are under fire right now. First and second are the only 2 that are fighting for dear life. I'm exercising the first right now. Right? Hillary Clinton is running on a platform to get rid of the second. Unbelievable that anybody would follow her. Half of you are bored to death of the idea of listening to another 9/11 review, and probably more than half of you. But a fraction of you are going, what are you talking about? 9/11's an inside job. I've heard that before. You're a conspiracy nut, yada, yada. Okay. In order to call a person who says 9/11 is a conspiracy a nut, you have to have never gone to physics class. You've had to never studied a periodic table of chemistry, never talked to a pilot about aviation restrictions, and you haven't paid attention to what's gone on in this world since it occurred. America was based on one idea, which was freedom. And then they attached it to everything. So freedom of religion, freedom of this, freedom of that. But it was freedom. Freedom from something called tyranny. Tyranny is when a government gets bigger than it's supposed to get and fails to serve the people and serves itself. It's when it fails to fear the people because it has gained so much control over the people that it no longer fears any outcome of the people's rebellion. And then they start the compression mechanisms to repress the living crap out of the people, almost out of some crazy, spiteful actions, because the politicians that are willing to sell out their people are sociopaths. There's 3 types of sociopaths that we recognize at MK Ultra in terms of the people who help destroy humanity. And of course, they sell themselves a bill of goods that they're so intellectual they're actually helping society, but it's not true. Starting at the top of these 3 categories, this is another article at onepagenews.com. You have sociopaths that are nerds. They're outcasts. They didn't do well as a youth getting along with other people. They think the society is completely against them because they couldn't understand that a tribe behaves in a certain way, and when you can't assimilate to the tribe tends to not integrate with you. So some of the nerds, sociopaths out there, would be Condoleezza Rice, who was a brilliant child, prodigy child. She was a concert pianist before, I think, by the age of 16, academically brilliant. Looked a little awkward. She was a black woman, so I don't know, in her era of growing up, she probably dealt with the tail end of segregation, which treated her, I'm sure, unfairly. And so she was willing when she served to spite society and hurt society and get on board with the 9/11 inside job thing, which she was a part of. Mayor Giuliani, little tiny guy, lost his hair pretty early, probably very bizarre, has a lisp. I mention these things because these are the things that society wouldn't probably accept in him. He ends up getting hired to clean up New York City. And believe me, nothing happens in New York City without approval from the people who own New York City. So this whole thing of cleaning up the Times Square, what he did was he kicked out all the little guys and brought in all the major corporations, because corporations wanted what was tourism down there. But of course, he gets this huge accolade that he kicked the gangsters' asses. And if there's one guy in the world that would be easy to bump off if they wanted to stop it, would be Mayor Giuliani. He's just one guy. But it was all orchestrated, all meant to be, pulling basically the power supply out of one master, which are the mobs, and giving it over to major corporations, which would either buy off the mob or protect anybody like Giuliani doing what he's doing. Obama. He's not in the article, but I'd throw him in that path as well. Even though he's fairly charismatic, he's definitely a handsome gentleman. He knows how to BS in a conversation. He has been reported in Hawaii with all of his schoolmates to have been a homosexual. To this day, they still hold on to that he still gets around and makes his rounds with men. Well, society doesn't accept that, and that's ridiculous. So they made this guy kind of an outcast. When they found him, he was an absolute nobody. He had never done anything. He'd never voted on anything. The guy was an absolute puppet from the very, very beginning. And it wasn't until they activated him by sticking their hand up his ass that he ever looked like he was doing anything productive for society. The guy shows up at a grade school to give a speech to little kids. His teleprompter doesn't work, and he can't say a word to the children. He's forbidden to say anything off script. And he's intellectually inferior to the point he can't do it. So he is purely skilled at being a puppet, almost like being an actor or a reporter on the news. He's not a journalist. He's just a repeater, which is another term David Icke said, which is great. Call reporters repeaters, because that's all they do. They don't actually research anything. They just look pretty on television and shovel crap into your mind. Okay, the next tier down, next classification of sociopath is the individual that is an obedient little boy or girl. Mostly boys, though. We have General Colin Powell. Colin Powell rose up through the military by being put in boot camp, and of course in boot camp the objective, and this is no secret, is they tear down your identity of yourself and they build you back up. And for a lot of kids it's fantastic. I mean, I think in an honorable military organization with great objectives to protect and serve, there's nothing wrong with that. You get these kids that are all entitled, especially looking in their iPhones, texting every second, worried about what happens in their soy boy Facebook page. Those guys get totally torn down and built back up to be men. And there's nothing more fantastic than the rite of passage for any human being, male or female. And that's what the military can offer, both male and female. I often regret not getting into the military, at least doing my 2 to 4 years. I really, really have that regret because I grew up on military bases with a military parent, and I admired my dad incredibly. And as I walked around on bases, everybody, these special forces guys and Marines that walked around, they were my heroes, man, and they still are to this day. I hope I've done well by myself, without their education. If I thought my body could handle basic, I might go in just to do it. But Christ, I'd have to train for a year just to go in at 46. But the problem is, the military can also, and this is, again, this is really not a slight on the military itself. This is really the people that are sitting at the top of the military who are not actually acting on behalf of the military. They're essentially these minions that come in from the ruling class to infiltrate the military. They get appointed into positions to do things with our forces and to exacerbate bad situations around the world, so that we end up doing stupid things with our soldiers, right? But you have your Colin Powell, who walked into the UN and claimed that there was weapons of mass destruction and that he had conclusive evidence that Saddam Hussein was just on the verge of poisoning all of the Middle East with a bunch of chemical weapons. A little side note was that Donald Rumsfeld went over there in the 80s and shook Saddam Hussein's hand. Go look up that photograph, Rumsfeld, Saddam Hussein. In that photograph, when he's shaking Saddam Hussein's hands, Rumsfeld's going over there, having just pushed aspartame out the door through the company Searle, who was eventually bought by Monsanto, I believe. He was trying to sell chemical weapons to Saddam Hussein. That's how we got him. That's how the Kurds got gassed, was because Donald Rumsfeld sold them over to Saddam Hussein. But Colin Powell has largely disappeared. One of his good friends actually defected and said that the last conversation he had with Colin was all about the fact that Colin was going to go get his money now. He had sold his soul to the devil, and he is out to get his cash and at least outfit his family while he goes to hell on a flaming chariot. He's going to try to leave behind money to take care of his family, who hopefully has avoided any damnation by his own doing, right? Those are sort of a paraphrase of his words. Then you have Petraeus, his replacement. Petraeus, who had an affair going on the side, which obviously with all the NSA spying, anybody can find out who's doing what. They can look at your web traffic and use it against you. They can manufacture web traffic against you, manufacture emails against you. It's very, very simple. They're just text files on a server. So someone could drop in anything they want and accuse you of stuff. You know, the public likes a show. The public likes a hanging, and the more that the public hates themselves because life sucks due to these repression mechanisms I'm telling you about, they just want to hang the witch, man. Go watch Monty Python, Quest for the Holy Grail, and go fast forward to the witch scene, or go look that up on YouTube. And this town that is suffering, everybody's literally fighting the plague in this town, was ready to hang the beautiful woman because they called her a witch. She had nothing to do with it. But they wanted to kill the have, because they're the have-nots. So Petraeus and Colin Powell are your sort of obedient sociopaths. They can't think for themselves. They don't feel comfortable thinking for themselves. They've been psychologically evaluated by the military to make sure they don't have original thoughts that don't come out of the rule books, the playbooks that are handed to them. It's almost like you're a coach for a football team, but you can't think for yourself and create a new play. The only thing you can do is go into the playbook of all your predecessors who were actually geniuses, perhaps, and thought of good plays. There's your second classification. Your third classification is your master engineers, your Henry Kissingers, your Donald Rumsfelds, your Dick Cheneys. These gentlemen are exceptional human beings. Unfortunately, according to our perspective of what they do and what they've done, it's not for the betterment of mankind. But they are not to be marginalized in terms of their mental capability. They are masterminds of society. They understand our world better than any one of us listening or talking right now understand. And so they are hired by the ruling class, and of course no one in their realm dislikes being included in the group. Henry Kissinger is probably one of the only people on planet Earth that I would say is actually in the club, actually in the elite club. I think that Rumsfeld and Cheney might have a little bit of extra protection, but Kissinger's really in the big club. What he has done for the ruling class is what Philander Knox did back in the 1800s and the early 1900s, getting the 16th Amendment installed. Kissinger, if you've seen him lately, should be dead. He is absolutely obese to a level that's unbelievable. And he's still walking. Cheney should have been dead 8 heart attacks ago, but he has the greatest medical coverage on earth, and he manages to keep going. Rumsfeld, I just haven't seen in ages, so I don't know where that guy is. Interesting thing about Rumsfeld is that he's actually a physical, he has a physical prowess, let's just put it that way. I guess he was a boxer in the Navy, I think it was. And so he could physically beat your ass back in his prime. So he had this physical prowess, the same thing that Bill O'Reilly has. Bill O'Reilly seems to think he's a big 6'5" guy. You may not get that by watching Fox, but he's a huge individual, and so he has that physical presence where I guess that throughout his life when he shook hands or whatever, he felt physically superior to other people. And maybe he's gotten a scrap or two, and he has gained confidence because he knows that most of society is weak, willing to capitulate, just out of sheer presence attack, not out of any skills demonstrated. I know a few people like this that are actually good people, but you can see how they feel their presence. It's interesting, right? Little secret about that: the second you don't back down, the second that your face doesn't look the slightest bit concerned about their prowess, they cut that shit off really fast. Their whole superiority, I'm bigger than you thing starts to end really, really fast because they understand they are weak inside, and they haven't really taken it to task most of the time. Now there's UFC fighters they're 5'2" that could kill you in 2 seconds. Doesn't matter how big you are, it just has to do with your confidence and your skills when it comes right down to it. So back to waking up. The reason why I go through the sociopath classification mechanism is so that you understand who the players are, right? Presidents and prime ministers are never selected because they have a will of their own. They're almost exclusively selected to be people who are utter egomaniacs. All they really want is a legacy. And they understand that their academic prowess and their capabilities by themselves is never going to actually produce that outcome. And so when given an opportunity to gain that accolade within their own mind, that arrogance confirmation in their own mind, it doesn't matter who has to perish in order to get it. All these sociopaths actually have that goal, especially the ones that are nerdy. The nerdy ones like to get back at society. Like I've said in previous episodes with Kyle, they're the people that don't go back to the high school reunions unless they're trying to throw it in your face of how wonderful they are and how much they've accomplished and how much you haven't. Your obedient ones, well, they're like animals. They're just feral. Am I doing the right thing, Mommy? Am I doing the right thing, Daddy? That's how they behave. But your masterminds are literally salivating like a beast that's like, I'm not even hungry, but I want to tear you to shreds. That's more like the mastermind mentality, right? So 9/11, what did they say happened that day? I'm not going to try to get into all the evidence because I think most of you are tired of it. And it's really not important to review all the evidence. Like when I talk about the moon missions, it's more about why that happened and how they did the cover-up than to go into all the the details of, and this is weird and this is weird. But everyone woke up that morning, and it was 2001, which is interesting because the last time we had a massive attack on American soil was 1941. So 60 years plus a couple months, or minus a couple months, we had 9/11. And obviously it was horrific. On one level, it was brilliant. It was utterly amazing how they were able to pull this thing off. For all of their mistakes, they have 10 things that convince people it was real, as dictated by the evidence, right? What's really going on in 9/11 is to kick off a neocon banker agenda to take over the Middle East, like I said. That's what it was all about. But again, nobody in the world would ever go for that. And don't forget that the 7/7 bombings happened in London, and then the Spain-Madrid subway bombings also happened. And people were killed who knew that it was an inside job, right? In London it was horrible because they actually were running a drill on the 7/7. And even the guy that was in charge of the security company that orchestrated the drill came out that day and said, well, what's really weird is that we were actually running a simulation of exactly the same thing that actually occurred. The exact same thing that occurred was actually being done as an agenda that morning as a drill. And then it happens, right? So every country over there had just enough to manipulate them to get into this bandwagon to run over and contribute to this particular agenda. That morning, everyone is in shock. Everyone wants to know who the hell did this. Let's get them back. Let's clean up the mess. Let's try to figure out how many people died. And just the discussions that morning. Again, like I said the other day, they said there was up to 10,000 people in the World Trade Centers, not telling us that most of the people had moved out of the building and that it was a huge loss center, that it was packed full of asbestos. And the insurance companies that were going to underwrite the removal of the asbestos wanted $2.5 billion for the policy because asbestos is so absolutely poisonous that, you get a little bit in your system and you will die of cancer unless you fight it really, really fast, right? If you're a guy that removes asbestos and uses a screwdriver in the morning to knock asbestos out of a wall, the policy is you have to throw the screwdriver away. Now, it's removed every day in the world and no one ever admits it. Like if you have a popcorn ceiling that hasn't been painted over several times by a sprayer, that popcorn ceiling is usually made of some asbestos. But this day, which goes down in infamy, right, was given an alternate story that, although still horrific, was believable, I guess. Wasn't really believable if you know anything about the individuals they accused. But on one side of the hemisphere of your mind, they're telling you that Osama bin Laden, stuck in a cave somewhere, orchestrated 9/11 because he's related to the bin Laden family and they're multi-billionaires, and so the kids inherited about $500 million, and that he orchestrated this and moved funds around and got all of his terrorists over to America. Again, most of them every single one of them marked as Saudi Arabian passports, right? But in the spectrum of pain in your mind, going towards this idea that your government is all of a sudden the conspiratorial body against you is just too hard to believe. There's a pain threshold on this thermometer of your mind. This is what they understand. The reason why they're able to get away with all this stuff is because there's a built-in regulator in mankind. You're born with it. I talked about TMS a few episodes ago, where the body actually creates phantom pain to keep your consciousness from remembering horrific thoughts from your past. And through psychotherapy, they're able to get you to communicate with that past, give it a relief valve, get it out of your system, and all of a sudden your body stops having phantom back pain, arm pain, chest pain, neck pain, all that stuff, migraines, all that stuff. Because your brain no longer has to rob your body of oxygen and your muscle tissues to distract you from having the bad thought. Well, the same thing goes that when your mind starts, if over here, and I'm going to your left, over here, or I guess maybe to your right, you have total euphoria. Everything's great. You're going to Disneyland. And on the other side is absolute horrific nightmare, so horrific that your mind can't piece together the data. You are just falling through the abyss of hell. That's the other side of the spectrum. There is, different for everyone, the more awake you are, the more that you can slide your bar over, but there's a threshold where your mind simply shuts down. Now, every single human being on Earth, at least as a human, has a bar. You have a bar. Not even the ruling class can go all the way to the edge, but they're damn near close, right? But they understand that when presented with the idea that every American would have to wake up and take over their country because it's been taken over by the ruling class, by the financial oligarchy of Europe, they bought off all your politicians, they bought off all your military heads, or at least enough people in the Pentagon to get the military to do whatever they're told to do. Again, remember that the military is packed with a bunch of Petraeus, Colin Powell, obedient people. They're filtered mentally to make sure that that's what their disposition is, right? They don't feel like they've done the right thing unless they've been told to do the right thing. You know, they need a czar over them to tell them how to run their lives. Okay. So they understand. The agenda simply has to be beyond that bar, the average bar in a human being's mind. It's on the other side of the pain threshold. And as long as they can hide their agendas on the other side of that pain threshold, it's a freebie. It's a mental freebie with all the people. It's almost as if that movie, They Live, that John Carpenter directed in, I believe, 1985. If you haven't seen it, you must see it. It is an objective. Write it down. They Live. It's a remake of the old 50s movie, but it's totally jacked up. And this guy, John Carpenter, was alive and awake back in the 80s, right? But what happened was that they rebuilt the world. This alien race had rebuilt the entire planet Earth with a bunch of subliminal programming on everything. So every time you picked up a magazine, what the pages really say is obey, spend money, procreate, all these kind of things. But what we saw were the advertisements and all of the normal signage that's everywhere. But someone had created some glasses that if you put them on, you could start to see everything that was actually out there. That's the traditional story of They Live. But he did a brilliant job. So the problem for the world elite, the ruling class, is that they're now, because of the internet especially, there's a gigantic collection. And I'm going to tell you, I have no idea what the number is, but I would suggest, okay, it's over a couple 100 million people, which might sound like a lot, but that's below a single % of world population that are actually totally awake. Hell, we might even have 30% of the world awake. I don't know. But shows like this and shows like other people with great documentaries, Alex Jones, even David Icke on his level of his people, and all these people that wake people up, the group of people that can move their bar over closer to that more painful threshold to see reality for what it exactly is increasing. The range of light spectrum that we're able to see now is a lot wider. So what the public is told, so what's happening is the entire time the banking elite go in and start up their war, they just immediately start attacking the wrong people. You know, if Saudi Arabia was where all the passports came from, you know, if that's the official story, then why isn't something happening in Saudi Arabia? If nothing else, we just call up our friends over there and we say, you need to find out who the hell in your king prince circle over there funded this thing and get rid of them. Show us the evidence that you found them so we can relax. But instead, what do? We pass the Patriot Act, right? It's like a 9,000 page document, which is actually 1,100 pages when you actually read the core document. No senator read it except for Ron Paul and one other guy, but it references out to other documentation that makes it about 90. I think Ron Paul said it's just shy of 10,000 pages when you read all the little addendum references outside. That completely gutted the Constitution. They put it into practice right away. Now, it's not like the NSA hasn't existed forever, and it's not like all the people in the NSA are bad guys. Honestly, I think that, you know, again, a large 90-plus percentile of these guys are just going to work and doing their job. They're patriots, you know. Now, with that kind of capability, you can also have a bunch of crazy pedophiles, sexual perverts looking at all your stuff and stealing it and getting off on it. And I think that's, I know it sounds childish, but I'm willing to bet that there's a huge contingency of people that are fighting from those top layers because they have this crazy spy software and they can do whatever they want in the middle of the night or a day. Imagine Google Earth and you zoom down and every single device that they can punch into, which is everything connected to the cloud, is a little dot. They even have the GPS coordinate of exactly where you are in the house. And they go, oh, there's a laptop on a bed and it's 9 o'clock at night. Let's punch into the camera and see what's there. There's a cell phone on a coffee table in a skanky hotel, and we've done the profile on the individual, and they're a millionaire. So millionaires in a skanky hotel, and his house is 2 blocks away. Oh, I bet something's up to no good in there. Let's punch into the camera. Let's listen to the microphone. I guarantee you that's happening, right? We start a bunch of crazy activities in the Middle East, torturing people like crazy. Well, they passed the Military Commissions Act, which made a bunch of torture that already had occurred legal and made spying on the American people a mandate, which violates the Fourth Amendment. No eavesdropping. We just gave up constitutions that our forefathers put together, which took a 2/3 majority in this country to pass into ratification, into activation. Our forefathers were just erased. The freedom, and you know, when you say freedom is a word and then it has a definition after the word, the definition of that word has been completely gutted in America. And no one seems to care. Because they've been sold as a bill of goods that it was all Osama bin Laden and his gang of guys, right? Well, according to the official stories, he's dead. Even our official story said he died in the end of 2001 and out of kidney dialysis failure in some place. Never spent a day in a cave in his life. Visited a Jordanian American Air Force base in June or July of 2001 under our budget, as witnessed by a ton of people. Saddam Hussein was witnessed getting on a Chinook, an American Chinook, by the AP Reuters guys, sitting there watching him walk out with his entire family, got an American vehicle and flew off. Is everybody delusional? Is everyone delusional who saw that? I doubt it. It's their job to observe. That's why they're journalists and not reporters. But when they publish a story, only got to Alex Jones and a few, side agencies. We're sold something that is palatable, while the true objective of what they do is inconceivable to most people. Because again, their pain threshold, again, it's no slight to humanity that we don't want to think horrible thoughts. Who the hell would want to, and who would raise their children to be able to? We shouldn't have to do that. And so the responsibility today is that adults must wake up to protect their children, if nothing else, but to just protect your own life. But I guarantee you, if you've had the experience I've had, those 3 types of sociopaths I told you, you're only going to bump into probably the first two categories. Your antisocial sociopath, right? The person who, again, grew up and thought the whole world was against them. And then your obedient layer that does everything that they're told. Those are the two that you'll mostly run into in life, because you don't run into Kissingers very often in your walk of life or my walk in life, right? So the first category, again, likes to watch the world burn. And the second category doesn't realize they've lit the world on fire. And so if you're obedient people, and then you have your people that are just devious. So they're an anti-force in the universe. And they're your neighbors. They're your brothers, your sisters, your mothers, your fathers. You probably shouldn't try to convert them, honestly. Just realize that they're out of the game. In most revolutionary wars across world history, I think the average percentage of people that were willing to fight was about 4%, which out of 320 million people in America, that's still quite a bit. So what it boils down to is that waking up means that you're going to call into your life pain. And who the hell wants to do that? The mind won't readily accept pain unless you push. And honestly, I don't like telling anybody that they have to go and feel pain. I don't like that. But the interesting thing is that there's a cycle of waking up. We've talked about it a little bit on the show, but never in quite explicit terms like I'm going to go through right now. And it goes something like this. When you start to wake up, especially if you're by yourself, you're stuck in a state or a town where it's very traditional, and you start reading this stuff and start doing the math, and maybe you're a physicist as a kid, or maybe you're a chemistry person, or you've flown a jet every once in a while, you have some buddies that fly, or you have some people you could just ask questions to, right? And you start doing your research and you realize right away, wow, this stuff could not have occurred. It just simply couldn't have occurred. And then you start looking up old false flags. Again, when LBJ, Lyndon B. Johnson, actually used his white knights, his little consortium of guys with the backing of the CIA and some mob people out of Cuba, all working together to get rid of JFK. For those of you who are new to that story, LBJ wanted to be president, and he absolutely did not like JFK at all. And JFK's father actually had a lot of contacts and through the primary so that JFK was the president-elect and LBJ was going to be the vice president. And LBJ was no man to be trifled with. He was a big, badass, southern Texas man. And he was very anti-establishment within being president, but that guy, he was honestly, he was evil, but he was a president. He wasn't like a puppet. He did do puppeted things, but he loved it. He loved every minute of it. But his concession to the bankers that allowed him to kill JFK, which is something he wanted to do anyway, and everybody at these top organizations didn't like the way JFK was JFK was the last good president we've ever had. And that's no exaggeration. There hasn't been a real president since JFK. But LBJ, again, if you watch my episode on money, you'll realize that America has been lured into wars to borrow money. Well, Vietnam, I didn't get as far up as Vietnam in the history because I thought I should probably pull back, was a huge borrowing game. There's nothing over there that we had anything to do with. We could say we were allies and that's why we got into it, but it was all a borrowing game. So they said, look, we'll let you bump off this guy and you can take the presidency. We don't give a crap. We really need this guy out here anyway because he won't do what we say. He's trying to shut down the CIA, trying to hobble the FBI. That's our tyranny control apparatus that we've worked, half a century to put in place, and this guy's going to get rid of it in like a semester of life, right? They had something called the Gulf of Tonkin, which is two events that never occurred, which is this romanticized, ridiculous story that the formidable Vietnam Navy attacked a tiny little ship in the oceans over there, and that's what caused us to go over and get in the war. Both events have now been declassified as having never occurred. It never happened, but that was the basis by which America was lured into Vietnam. Vietnam, which I believe killed almost 100,000 Americans, probably more. But I mean, I think there was a song called 19 back in the 80s. It was this cool little kind of 80s techno song, but it regurgitated all these facts about how many 19-year-olds died over there, right? And so LBJ is just shoveling Americans into this war borrowing tons of money to be there, borrowing tons of money to ramp up the military-industrial complex, all at great debt to Europe that we can't pay back because of the money Ponzi scheme. Again, see the episode on money if you have any questions about that. He held it for 2 terms. The Bohemian Grove attendee, Richard Nixon, gets in next, keeps the war going. And I think that the reason why Watergate occurred was that Nixon was trying to right a wrong. Probably trying to right several wrongs, but they said, this guy's off base. We need to get rid of him. Scandal on him. Watergate did happen. Okay. We have eyewitness testimonies and confessions and all kinds of stuff from family members of the people that actually did it. But it was all set up so he'd fail. Of course, he got kicked out. Ford goes into place, and Ford was like a Woodrow Wilson, just does everything he's told sort of guy. Again, that second layer of sociopath, right? Nixon being the first category of sociopath, sort of the geek, nerd, who could never become president before he did. He was very angry that Kennedy beat him in the late 50s, and he was very angry he never got an opportunity to knock LBJ out, the incumbent. But he finally got in and was a good boy for 1 term, got the second term, having shot his competitor in the gut. Not himself, but he had him shot in the gut, so he would fall out of the opposition primary. Most of you don't know that, do you? Right? These guys play for keeps, baby. Okay. And then, of course, you have the peanut farmer, who's absolutely benign to the system, won't buck anything. And, of course, they create the oil embargo on him. They create the Iran hostage situation. Iran was about to release all the hostages just before the election was to occur, where the citizens go in and vote for who's who. But then George Herbert Walker Bush has a recorded flight over to Iran to negotiate with them to hang on to the hostages until after the election. I believe it was the first month of the Bush-Reagan ticket, and the next year when he was pulled into presidency, that they released all the hostages, and it looked like Ronald Reagan solved the problem. It was all set up to make sure that Carter never got to stay. At that point, for the first time in history, we have a former head of the CIA, George Herbert Walker Bush, who was only, I think, in charge for, a little under a year in 1974. He is essentially running the show while Reagan is looking good in the front. Of course, Reagan does his 2 terms, and then who gets the election? Well, George Herbert Walker Bush gets in there. And then they repeat Carter with Bill Clinton. The absolute farm boy nobody comes out of thin air. No one's ever heard of the guy before. And Clinton had watched the Mena, Arkansas, runways, which is where the CIA was landing all of their planes for the heroin and cocaine. It's nearly declassified at this point, but I don't think they exist anymore. Of course, Hillary's right beside him the entire time. Meanwhile, Bill is sexually harassing everyone through the 80s as the governor of Arkansas. He does 1 term, gets kicked out. For some weird reason, he got kicked out. Then he got pulled back in, and then midterm of his second run at governor, he became president. And, of course, he presided over the boom of the Internet, which he's credited with. Of course, Al Gore takes credit for actually creating the Internet, which was funny. Al Gore had nothing to do with the Internet. Even his little tiny claim of the Internet had nothing to do with Al Gore. Okay. The Internet was created by the military and DARPA and was taken over by the colleges in 1969. And in 1991 or 1990, whatever, HTML protocol is created, and boom, we have the Internet. Al Gore was not a part of any of that, no matter what he says. No matter if he showed up to a meeting and went, oh, that's a good idea, now I did that, right? That's Al Gore's ego, because Al Gore is the first category, which he's a sociopath weirdo. He's just weird. He's just a weird guy. And now he's done. He's punched his ticket. He's done his inconvenient truth movement to start the global taxation called carbon taxation to create this hysteria about global warming, which doesn't exist, right? I mean, they're spraying our skies to move the jet streams around to create warming where there shouldn't be one. But in terms of being a natural cycle of Earth, well, I guarantee you pull these planes out of the sky that leave trails that last all day, the world will sort it out. The Earth will sort it out in 10 years. We'll be right back to normal. And guess what? There'll be record highs and record lows around the world forever. But the Internet just makes it look like an epidemic Because now with the internet, you can find out more information in 1 second than you ever could in 10 years back in the 70s and 80s, right? Again, global warming is a perfect problem reaction solution. They invent this problem. They invent the scientists that don't have degrees in this stuff to say that they're the experts on Al Gore's list of people. When the original 6 men that formed what's called the IPCC for the UN were actually told to go out and prove global warming was real, and they all resigned and said, it's not real, it's a bunch of crap. And there was a little surge in heat from the sun in 2003, so that got them a little bit going. That's when the IPCC did their thing. But they went off and created a documentary together called The Great Global Warming Swindle, where they reveal the whole plan. They go all the way back to the 70s. I'll let you go watch that. I won't regurgitate it to you. But what's their end goal? Well, their end goal is to reduce world population by creating taxes that make it more expensive to live. And the more you procreate, the more your taxes become incomprehensibly repressionistic. You can't survive. You can't pay your utility bills, your taxes, if you have too many kids, which will be any over one. Because remember, when 2 people have 1 child, they've reduced world population. If you have two children, you keep the world population the same. And if you have 3, you've created a growth pattern. Well, they definitely want to encourage you not to do the second one. And they're doing everything they possibly can to turn our men into women so that the one never happens. And to make women so absolutely greedy that they don't want the pain of childbirth. They certainly don't want the responsibility. I had a former close friend of mine who's just drifted away, but I had some friends go and visit her, and she just recently had a baby, and they said when they visited her, and she's from the Midwest, so she should have a Midwestern mentality, you would think, of having a family and settling down with somebody. And she recently got remarried. She's married twice, and she had a child with the second guy, a pretty good guy. And when they went over to visit her, she introduced her child as her life destroyer. Bizarre. Oh, and she doesn't bathe her child. It's a baby. It's a newborn. Doesn't bathe the child every day. She lays the baby down so much that it has a warped skull now. They showed me a photograph of this child, and the skull is absolutely deformed due to laying down too much. There's a big flat side of this skull. When her friends, who thinks now she's absolutely certifiably crazy and stuck inside the consumption circuit of Los Angeles and, this Western culture of more, when they suggested to her, man, you need to get one of those little helmets for your daughter because it'll straighten out her skull. She still, hasn't completely fused her bones and hasn't completely gotten, hard. Her skull's actually malleable at this stage. She said, oh, I couldn't walk around with a child with a helmet on. The child would look retarded. This kid's doomed. This kid's absolutely doomed. With a crazy mother who's been conditioned by society to prioritize her own personal gains over this child. And the funny thing is she's got a 9-to-5 job that pays the bills and a side business that's making money. There's no reason why you can't bathe your child every day and pick it up and hold it. And the poor husband, who thought he was marrying one of the most beautiful girls he'd ever met in his life, is now stuck with crazy because of society. And if we don't wake up, that little contingency story, that little, one-off story that's not going to be, common, will become more and more common. Do we need more people on planet Earth? Yeah, probably not. Probably could sustain what we have. Do some people need to reduce their countries? Absolutely. China and India need to do everything they can to come down closer to probably 500 million. And not by going over and killing people and killing firstborns and all that stuff, but by educating them to say, look, you're going to live a much better life if you don't have 8 children. No one can pay you a salary to take care of 8 kids unless you're an absolute genius. And not everybody can be a genius, and there's not enough money to go around to compensate people to that level. So I did an episode, a long time ago about dealing with being awake and the personal struggles that you might face dealing with individuals. And this one is sort of above that. This is sort of a 60,000-foot perspective of waking up. But when you talk to your friends, I want you to understand this biological limit, this psychological limit, probably better described, that prevents us from thinking thoughts that hurt. And it's a natural thing. And honestly, no one should have to think thoughts that hurt. But I think that for some of you who are awake, you realize that we don't have a choice anymore. We don't have a choice anymore. Some of us have got to push through that barrier and fight the good fight. And there's always going to be evil, and there's always going to be good. That's always going to happen. But each side tries to dominate the other side. Each side believes that if they get their entire way, the whole world will be perfect. But let's take for 1 second both sides of the hemisphere. Let's say that everything that we think is good wins, and everything that, then we'll run the exercise of everything bad that wins, and they get their way. In our world, we have this concept, the good people, I would say, you and me. We have this notion that if we can come up with some sort of euphoric balance of freedom, we have good sovereign money, we can actually own the land that we're on and pass it down to our kids. There's no inheritance tax to get rid of 50% of the inheritance from you to your child, which is something that the peasants like you and I have to do, but the elite of the world don't. We would have a bunch of people that may not have to work as much as they did in the past, right? We go back to 9-to-5 jobs. We go down to single income households, right? We deflate our money to the point where, again, you can go to dinner and a movie for 15 cents, and corruption and money doesn't exist. We, if we were to be so blessed to get that world, would have to increase education probably 1,000-fold to make sure that we don't have what happened in the 60s with the communes, which I've mentioned several times. And just to review, my friends who are in their 60s and 70s, who actually grew up in the 60s and went to communes and helped form them. And for those of you who don't know what a commune is, it would be a group of people that say, we're going to pull out of society and live out in a desert, live in a forest, live in a grasslands, and we're going to essentially build huts or maybe a geodesic dome. We're going to live in it. We're going to just contribute. We're going to farm food. We're going to clean our clothes. We're going to educate and entertain each other. And in all cases of my friends, which is probably 3 very, very specific communes that they spent a lot of time, months in, they all said the same thing to me. They said 3% of the people, they said when they all came together, everybody worked for a little while. But then they said after a month or so, in fact, one of my guys said, just after a month, 97% of the people, and they had the math of all the heads that were there, sat around and did nothing. And let the other 3% serve them. Now, that might be because they ended up, you might think it's because they were so repressed by society that for the first month they just needed to relax. But these were young kids in their 20s that hadn't really experienced paying bills. And so they didn't have what you and I might have over 40, over 35, or you're over 30 even, just paying bills and the attrition of the repression of life as it exists today. If we got put in that scenario, yeah, if I were to run a commune, I'd say, look, 10% of us are going to be on vacation. And we're going to rotate that 10% around the commune so everybody gets sort of this vacation. And you do get to live in a sort of relaxing world. But it's going to be a very small percentage, and the rest of the 90% are going to have to work. And if we all work, we'll barely work, right? If 90% of the people went off to get food, well, shoot, maybe just a handful of berries, for 90% of the people came back with a handful of berries, we'd all eat for a week. Who knows, right? But when 3% are doing it, they're busting their back, trying to bring just enough food to keep people alive. So we have to be careful, and this is why this show exists in a big way, MK Ultra and Deep Thoughts, is that if we do ever get control over the world, what the hell do we do with it? We've got to find experts in every category of life. And that's not easy, especially when we're strung out on malls, we're strung out on credit cards, we're strung out on things we can't afford, And some people have money, and they spend it because they have it. And they're always going to have some because they got some to invest and everything. No, there's nothing wrong with money. Nothing wrong with being wealthy. Nothing wrong with having things that you like. It's just if you don't have balance and a capability to do, like Gene Simmons, who doesn't use credit cards either, and consequently he's a very famous rock star, but he tells everyone, live within your means. And you'll be surprised how far you can take it when you don't have crushing debt that amasses on your consciousness, right? So let's take the ruling class agenda. I don't know how many people are at the top. I don't know how many people live in the capstone, and I don't know how many people are in the club. But let's just say 5,000 people are up there. A little bit of the servants. Most of them are descendants of descendants. If the Rothschilds really exist and they're really up there, then I would imagine that less than 100 Rothschilds actually participate in the running of the world. I would probably wager less than 50. And the rest are just descendants who are getting their, dividends from the family earnings and kind of told to stay out of trouble. Don't make any, waves out there to get anyone looking at us. And here's a vineyard you can take care of, and here's a cigar plant you can take care of, and et cetera, et cetera. Some of you want to be in politics. We'll hook it up so you can get elected somewhere in the world and do your thing and carry the agenda forward. But all the plans that we hear about them through Agenda 21, where they want to essentially erase 99% of the world, and that might sound crazy, but there's plenty of proof on planet Earth that that's their objective. It's been said that they want to actually reduce the world back to the Middle Ages in terms of technology, whereby the ruling class at the top of the pyramid have, hover cars, zero-point energy systems, infinite food, infinite health, maybe even I was going to say eugenics, but I was going to say like youth serum drugs where they don't age. Maybe they do live several hundred years and look like they're in their 30s and 40s doing it. You better believe that someone in the world, if that's capable and we've ever discovered it in some back laboratory, they might be taking that right now. Who knows? And can you imagine how powerful you would be if you could see history over hundreds of years, Not to mention there are ledgers in their history books which are actually more correct than anything in the world, right? But they're going to want a contingency of human beings to take care of them, servants. Who knows what race they might have picked? Who knows if they're trying to replace it with robots? Maybe that's the case. But it would be safe to say that someone's going to have to entertain them. Someone's going to have to entertain them, and it probably won't be their own kind. Sure, maybe a little kid does a little play here and there. But overall, they're going to want a contingency of humans to serve them as they continue doing whatever the hell they want. Maybe they fly around the stars. Maybe they figured out how to do that. Doesn't sound like euphoria for very long. There's a Twilight Zone out there, which I think is called Mind Over Matter. And it's about a guy who he's a single guy. He wakes up and goes to work every day, and every day he goes to work, this little nerdy kid who admires him spills a coffee on him, and it just reinforces how much he hates society. He hates waiting in line in traffic, waiting in line in the subway. He hates, just coexisting with humans. And this kid gives him a book, Mind Over Matter, and says, my friend of mine turned me on to this book, and he says that if you can just think it, it can happen. And so he goes home that night, and he wishes away the whole world. So there's no more people in the world. And so he just gets up and goes to work the next day all by himself. And of course, there's no purpose to his existence at that point because he's serving no one but himself. Eventually, this ego of his starts talking to him through mirrors and stuff and says, it's great, right? You're totally happy, right? You're the only person on planet Earth. And then, of course, very quickly in a single day, he realizes that was a mistake. And so he wishes into the world a bunch of people that look just like him, a bunch of him in the world. And the females are him in drag, and the guys are just him. But they are all cantankerous, angry humans just like him. Sort of like that inbreeding algorithm. If you've got a flaw in your system, it just compounds over time. Well, this guy was surrounded by his flaws. He got to see himself unlike any human being on earth ever saw himself. So he regretted doing it, and he wished everything back to the way it was. And he goes to work the next day, and the kid spills the coffee on him, and he's like, it's okay. I'm glad you spilled that coffee on me. I'm glad that you exist, sort of. And the kid asks him, well, what'd you think of the book? And he covers and says, it was all just conjecture and poppycock. It doesn't work. And the show ends. There's that old saying, be careful what you wish for. And I think that's a big one, which is why we have to know what the hell would actually work long term. So I know you feel me. It's a very esoteric one, but it's a deep thoughts. And that's where we go. When you go into the chaos of the mind, it's all sort of esoteric and jumbly. But just know that we have a built-in regulator that lets them win. And if we don't adjust our regulator and explain the regulator to other people, we're going to continue to have this problem for the rest of our existence. So let's break it down. If you haven't gone already, go to mkultraradio.com. From there is every link. You know the game. Again, our Facebook is doing really, really well. These videos are getting watched quite a bit, even our normal episodes. Colin and I are going to be recording, I think, this weekend, and so we should have another episode or a couple episodes for at least Sunday. And we look forward to hearing comments from you. Again, you guys are doing a great job posting and helping us kind of figure out what's important out there. And again, I don't want to do too many more of these episodes out of the past, just putting them in video form with a little bit of elaboration. We really want to answer questions that you have. And don't be bashful. If anything, you don't want to expose your particular Facebook account, create a fake one. Join and then start commenting. You don't want to expose your YouTube account. Just create a fake one and start commenting on us, right? Facebook's probably one of the easiest ways to do it, but, we'll take it however you can give it to us. But anyway, we're honored you're here. As we always say, learn the rules that rule you. Take care of yourself and somebody else, and we'll, as always, see you in the next episode. Over and out.